Hello friends, welcome to your new chapter, that is Introduction to Risk in Risk Management. So my name is Jayant, where I will be handling you the overall risk management for this semester. So this risk management is of totally 6 modules. So in the 6 modules you will be learning about what is the introduction of risk and the overall introduction of risk management, credit risk, market risk, and some of the tools to derive the risk management and its complete knowledge. So to have a look over what is risk management and its needs, so first we shall learn about what is risk and what is uncertainty. So coming to module 1, so you will be learning what is the definition and what are the sources and what is the interface between risk and insurance, and finally some techniques and some clauses and risk covers. So let's start our new chapter with some case studies, and the overall brief discussion shall be done to our chapter. Welcome to our first chapter. So whenever you heard a word called risk, so this risk shall be called as dangerous. So whenever you if you hear somewhere there is a risk, there is a risk, there is a risk, so there is something called problem. So this risk, in a very long back ago, it is been derived from a Latin word which is been called as riscum, that is also called as the meaning which says risk at the sea or that which cuts. So this risk just not been used in a one context, so risk is been there in each and every way. So when you are walking, so there is a risk what may occur, you don't know. So whenever you are sleeping, you don't know what may happen, so that is once again called a risk. So if we take examples, you will get hundreds and thousands of examples where you will have a risk. So when you are investing somewhere, so that is something called risk. So if you know something called equity shares, if you are investing, it's a risk. Wherever you have a risk, there you have a return. So that is what you have to understand. Wherever you have a risk, that is where you have a return. If you take a risk, based on the risk, you will find a return. So here you have multiple definitions for a risk. So the undesirable event which will occur. So you don't know what may happen today, or you don't know what may happen tomorrow. Suddenly there may be something called a crisis which can happen, so there it is a risk. So the magnitude of loss from an unexpected event, so you were not expecting that to happen, but it is been unexpectedly happened, so that is somewhere a risk. The probability that things won't go right, so you will think that I will score 100 in the examination, and finally when you go back on the morning, so you will find that the paper was very tough and you couldn't write well. So your overall probability what you have studied has gone back and it was something different. So once again there is something called risk. The effect of an adverse outcome, so you will be feeling that today it will go on well and today will be a luckiest day, and finally that luckiest day will turn into something called unluckiest day. So you can't predict that this will happen and that may happen. So finally there is something called risk which is been involved in all the aspects. So this is how they will define that risk is somewhere which is common and which has to be negotiated and which has to be managed very well. So coming to the meaning and definition of what is risk and uncertainty. So whenever it comes to risk, be very careful. Risk is the potential of losing something. So this risk is something called a potential of losing something which is related to the value, or which may be against something called potential to gain something of value. So whenever this risk is being negotiated, so there may be related to physical health, or it is related to social status, or it may be related to emotional well-being, or it may be related to financial wealth. So it may be gained or it may be lost. So when taking risk which will be resulted for in giving action or an activity or an unforeseen or foreseen situations. So this is something called risk where it is being defined. So if it has to be avoided, so it is only related to preemptive action. Risk is been also called as unexpected and unpredictable event. Why? Because if an such example, if destruction of a building, or if the wiping of all the computer files, or loss of funds through theft or an injury. So however it is been happened, it is something called risk which is been unexpected or an unpredictable, where it is virtually it is threatening the limits of the ability. So this is what a risk says. So there can be a damage, or there can be an injury, or there can be a liability loss which is unpredictable, where you don't know. So whatever has been happening, a negative occurrence, so where it is very much threatening to the action of the people. So this is where risk has been identified. So risk is not somewhere, as I told earlier, it is not according to one context. So risk is in each and every context where you can be having an overall measures. So risk are of two types. One is systematic risk and one more is unsystematic risk. So when it comes for systematic risk and unsystematic risk, systematic risk is uncontrollable by an organization and it is macro in nature. So this systematic risk is being influence of external factors of an organization. Internal factors is something related to the factors which is being associated in the organization. External factors is something outside the organization. So that is something called internal and external. So whenever there is something called systematic risk, it is uncontrollable by the organization. That is, which cannot be controlled by the organization. It needs some other measures for controlment. And it is also called as macro in nature. When it comes for unsystematic risk, it is due to the influence of internal factors in the organization. So within the organization, if there is any problem which is been occurring, this is something called as unsystematic risk. So for systematic risk, I told it is macro in nature and an external factor. For unsystematic risk, it is an internal factor and it is micro in nature. So within the particular organization, you will be having a problem, and that can be taken and that can be controlled by a necessary action. So where can it can reduce the and it can reduce the risk, or and it can mitigate the effect of the risk by controlling the overall organization. So this is what something called systematic risk and unsystematic risk, whereas these are the some of the two classifications where it will come under risk. So once you hear something called risk, so risk is something called uncertainty, where everywhere you will be hearing. So then what is this uncertainty? So you will be getting to know something called this is uncertain in nature, this is uncertain in nature. This is what you will be hearing sometimes. So this uncertainty, actually what it tells is, it is a situation in which where you will not be knowing what will happen, or it is not known, or it is also not certain. So this is what uncertainty is being called as. So in brief, if we talk about uncertainty, so risk can always be measured. So you can identify there is something called risk which can be identified and which can be measured. Example, if you are climbing a mountain, so you will be knowing what is the proportional ratio and what will be the risk which will be included. So the risk which will be included, if we take it as 20% or the 30%. So these are some of the risks where it will be identified, and you will be taking the certain necessary measures before itself. In school or colleges, if you people were in NCC or some other sports, so you would be knowing there would be some ambulance measures, and there would be some first aid kit which would be kept earlier, because if there is any problem which has been going on. So risk can be measured, whereas uncertainty is immeasurable. So it is not possible to calculate. So that is one of the main disadvantages of uncertainty. So sudden arise of the problem which is been happening, that is something called uncertainty. So in uncertainty, as I told, you cannot calculate the probabilities, or you cannot forecast the assumption. So you cannot forecast the assumption, and as well as you cannot calculate the probabilities. So if you are not supposed to calculate that, you couldn't find out, so that is something called uncertainty. So for example, if you are predicting the stock market price, for instance, like 50 years in advance, so if you are predicting now, it is something called uncertain in nature, which will not happen. So this is something called the mean risk as well as uncertainty. So here we learned about what is risk and uncertainty by its meaning and its classification. When it comes for differences, so once again it will tell the same thing. When it comes for uncertainty, you cannot calculate the probability, which is uncertain in nature, and where you will not be knowing what will come or what will ascertain. So once again it is immeasurable and you don't know how to calculate. So when it comes for risk is been measurable thing, and risk is something which is been controlled. So risk is something called controlled, and where it is been something called possibility, or which is also called as a known probability. So everywhere it is been identified, and everywhere it is been certain in number. So this is what risk says, and this is what uncertainty says. So in brief, you learn about these differences and you can write the same. So coming to classification of risk, you have different types of risk, and the first one is strategic risk. So what will this strategic risk say, sir? So strategic risk is a type of risk which is been affected or been created by an organization business strategy and its strategic objectives. Example, if you start for any of the new venture, or if you are starting with any of the new product or the production, so everywhere you require something called strategy. So when this strategy is been not working out, then it will be occurring something called as risk, and which will be affecting the overall environment of the business and the overall environment of the organizations. Every business will be having the strategic team where it will be taking over the overall business calculations and its needs. So if there is any mistakes, or if there is anything called uncertainty which is been happening, so then the overall strategy of the business will come into lack of the opportunities, and finally it will go under loss. So this strategic risk involves something called business environment and the overall business strategy, and it will be related to the product and the distribution strategies and the policies or the implementation which it is been following. Why this policies is very important, sir? So whenever this policy or the measures which is being taken by the company, so if it is been not up to the mark, and if it is not up to the level of the organization, then whatever strategy is being done, then it will go under loss. So this is why strategic risk has been very important, where the overall design and finally the overall reputation of the brand image will be related to whatever strategy they are making. So if the strategy is going on good, then it will not be a risk. So whenever it is something called problem which has been happening, so there are serious problems which is been occurring related to overall organizational damage. So this is what a strategic risk says. So it is also been very oftenly used as an decision of company's worth, or it is also been used for determining of the overall organization's worth or factor. So the second risk is something called operational risk. See, operational risk is something about the operational activities which is been planning in a continuous order. So operational risk are the major risks that affect an organization ability to execute its strategic plan. See, operational activities is something about day-to-day activities which will be taking care in each and every manner. So this operational risk includes the management, leadership and the decision making. So everywhere the overall manager will take care what is the decision which is to be taken, and the leadership activities which will be core in action. So operational process which includes the product range of the product and the overall network distribution and the procurement and the overall supply chain management. So this is what operational process will give you a brief explanation. So that is why if the operations of the organization or an company is being proper with continuity of operations and with proper information, then everything will be going on smoothly and this operation will be in a very proper way, that is in a strategic plan. But if operational risk is been having some of the major risk, then the overall strategy and as well as the operation will be in a problem, and finally, so that is something very downfall to the organization which is been happening. And the third risk is the economic risk. Economic risk is been related to the overall economy. So how it is means the overall price development or the production factors. So it is inevitably related to the organization. So if there is anything related to economy, if there is any loss or the rise in the economy, that will directly impact for an organization's profit or loss. So if there is a price development of the production factors, operating cost and some of the technological factors and the overall financial risk and the reporting, so everything will be in action, where if an economy arises with a loss, and that will be in action with the organization, and if there is a good opportunity which is in the organization, that will directly impact in the organization. So the fluctuation of the prices in the economy will lead to the economic risk. Next one, pure and speculative risk. So this is quite simple. A pure risk is a risk where there is only possibility of loss or no loss. So if this pure risk has been happening, either you will suffer with the loss or you don't suffer with any of the loss. Example, earthquake. So what is the speculative risk? So the word you have there, speculative, so which is not in nature. So it is where both profit and loss are possible. So if you are gambling, so if you are playing, so there in gambling, either you can go with the profit or either you can go with the loss. So this is both of profit or loss which is been possible. Pure risk is something where you have only the possibilities of loss or no loss. So there it's just a possibility. When it comes for speculative, it's of both profit or loss which is been happening. And next one is diversifiable risk and non-diversifiable risk. Diversifiable risk is a risk which affects only individuals or small groups, because it is non-systematic in nature and it is also called as particular risk. So example, individuals in the sense, so I as a giant, I am having a bike or a car where my bike or car has been thefted. So if this is been happening, it's only for an individual person, this is called as diversifiable risk. So the important terminology what you have to remember is it is been individual and it is been related to small groups. When it comes for non-diversifiable risk, so this non-diversifiable risk affects the entire economy and it will be large number of persons or groups within the economy. Excuse me. It is also called as systematic risk or fundamental risk. So the best example what you can find out in the present economy is Corona. Why? Because everywhere, every individual, you don't know whether it is been happening for one person or it is been happening for the group. So here you can easily tell that the overall Corona, COVID-19, what is been happening, it is for a large number of people, and this is something called non-diversifiable risk, where you can't identify the exact problem. So diversifiable risk is the only for individual or it is only for small group. So that is why it is called as a non-systematic risk. And when it comes for non-diversifiable risk, it is something where more number of people will get smashed and more number of economy will come down. So the best example will be hurricane, and as well as presently the COVID-19 what has been suffering from, that is something called non-diversifiable risk. So if it is a non-diversifiable risk, we require some assistance from government as well as some assistance from all the other resources. So that is why non-diversifiable risk plays an important role in each and every manner. The next risk are enterprise risk. So this enterprise risk will be related to all the major risk which is being faced by business. So this business, whenever you are starting with an organization, it can be included with pure risk, speculative, strategic, operational, financial, and as well as the accidental risk. So from top till bottom, all the risk will be attached to the enterprise. Enterprise is nothing about business or an organization where it should be encompasses with all the major risk. So to make sure this enterprise risk has to be taken care, so you should have a good strategy for all the risk which has been associated. Then it is something called the outcome of enterprise risk where you can overcome. But here you have something called enterprise risk management. So this enterprise risk management is something about how you are managing the overall major risk which is being affected by the firm. So how it is to be managed? So to manage it is not a very easy job. It requires some very good strategies, and it requires something called very good operational activities. Only because of that you can manage the overall enterprise risk management. Accidental risk. So whenever you are in a very big production unit in an organization, there shall be some accidents which will be happening day by day if there is certain necessity after taking fully necessary measures. So there will be something called Environmental Safety Act where it has to be taken. So according to that, the overall environment of the business and overall business operations, everything has to be taken. So accidental risk, in the one part it will say how a person has to be taken care, and his family and the overall insurance of the employees. So this is what one safety will come into picture, and this is what something called accidental risk. And one more thing is the overall environment of the business and the overall environment of the organization. So if employees are working well and they have a very good relationship, that is they are talking well to their co-friends, and if they have a good relationship, then you will be having a very good organization. So if there is something called problems which is been occurring, then it is something to be called as accident risk which is been in problem. That is, the environment is not much safe here to have a look. Then it also relates to business operations and stakeholders. So for a business to be started or for a business to be run on very smoothly, our stakeholders are very important. So we should take care of our profit and as well as the environment and as well as the overall business operations. So if everything necessary thing is being taken care properly, then it is been safe, or this will turn into something called accidental risk, which is very dangerous in nature. Some of the major personal risk or the commercial risk are personal risk, property risk, and the loss which has been occurring, and the liability risk and the commercial risk. These are some of the major personal risk where you should be knowing what are the different types of personal or commercial risk. Every business risk will be having something called internal or external risk. So this internal or external risk will be very important in identifying for all the business to make sure that whether we have a profit or a loss for the organization. So the internal factors, that is the internal risk of the business, are the human factors, technological factors, physical factors, organizational and operational factors, the strategic risk, innovation, financial structure, and employee risk. So these are some of the different bulletins where you have to make sure these are some of the internal risk. So human factors, when it comes for human factors, so the overall employees has to be taken care very properly, and the HRM policy, that is the human resource management, is very important. So if there is any problem which is been occurring there, so then it is something called internal risk. So one thing you should be knowing, internal risk is something called in the business organization. So in the group, if there is any problem which is been happening, so that will be something called internal risk, which will be problematic for the organization. So there are some technological factors which may affect for an organization. So in this technological factors, everyone should be trained properly. So if there is anything problematic happening in any of the technology, then they will face a severe issue, that is something called technological factors. When it comes for strategic risk or the organizational operational risk, so the overall operational risk is something once again imbibed in the internal factor. So in internal, if there is a problem in the operational value, so then it will be directly related to the internal problems. So finally, the financial structure and the innovation. So if I want to produce some material tomorrow, so then we require all the materials which should be ready for the production. So for that it requires a good financial structure some days ago itself. So if this financial structure has been not given properly, if financial structure has been not supported for the organization, then everything will be delayed and there will be a problem which will be occurring for the organization. So these are some of the risks which will be associated, and the main thing is something called innovation here. This innovation will speak really very well. Why? Because every company is been challenging these days, and every company will be having a risk, and every company will be having an uncertainty. In spite of all this, you can take an example of Japan. So everywhere there will be something called hurricane or tsunami which will be happening, and finally it will recover in very few days, and once again it will be very challenging, and finally they will innovate something and they will be in an challenging era. So when it comes for this a small country called Japan, so every organization should be having something called innovation, where if you are innovating something, if you are using some good technical methods, then only you can survive. So if there is no innovation in the organization, then it is something a serious problem which has been happening in internal risk. When it comes for an external risk is all about outside the organization where it has to be taken care. So there are natural factors, economical factors, political compliance, technological risk, health and safety. What is this external risk all about, sir? The natural factors is something called a tsunami or the hurricane, what we were speaking about. So it will outboundly, which will be directly related to the organization, where natural factors are very important for this overall measures. Economy factors. So if there is a sudden crisis which has been happened, then there will be a loss. So this example, this for economic crisis, the very good example is something called Corona. Why? Because after this COVID-19 lockdown, there is a serious problems what we are facing. So finally economy is in loss, and finally economy is going down day by day, it's been becoming very serious. So finally that will directly affect to the organization. Political factors. So for this political factors, the best example has been Tata Nano. So some political factors will really help you a lot for an organization, but some political factors, if it is not been much helping or surviving, then it will be seriously dangerous for an organization. So finally the overall health, safety and technological, everything will be once again an external risk, where everything has to be measured properly and should make sure that everything is according to the organizational level of success. So this external and internal risk are very dangerous for an organization, and if it has to be taken care, there are some of the factors where it has to be. So what is this? Now you have got a brief idea on what is risk, uncertainty and what are some of the problems. So what is this risk management, sir? So now you have learnt about risk. Now you will learn how to manage the risk. So to manage the risk, it is concerned with what are the purposeful activities towards the overall achievement of the organizational goal. So I know that there is a problem which is been occurring today, but still how can you manage that risk and how can you overcome the problem? And you will be knowing that the physics examination is tough, but still how can you manage that physics examination and to score 100? So that is where you have to manage the problems and manage the risk. So risk management is being defined as the identification, analysis and the economic control of those risks. So the overall identification of the risk of you are doing, and the final assessment for the management. So this is something called management of the risk. So risk will always be there in any of the contextual text. So you have to make sure that risk has to be managed by identifying and to mitigate in a very proper way. So that is how the risk will get control, and that is where risk management will be efficiently useful in the organization. So there are some nature of risk management where you should be knowing, that is the scientific approach of dealing with pure risk, broader than insurance management, and it is pure and speculative risk, and it is fundamental particular risk. So the nature of risk management is nothing about what are the different type of risk which will be involved while you are doing a work. It's very simple. When you are in the organization, you will be knowing that risk may occur. You don't know what type of risk, but you know you have studied types of risk and classification of risk. So these are some of the different type of risk which will be coming into picture. So once again, in the overall nature of risk management, you will be knowing how you will make sure that overall risk has to be managed. So if these are the different types of risk, how it has to be mitigated. So this is in a very brief what is the nature of risk management. So it can be any of the form. So taking COVID-19 as the example once again. So they have told it can spread from person to person. So now you are having an transportation. So from transporting you can have once again a serious issue. So wherever you travel, you don't know how it will come. It may come in any form. That is how risk management is. Wherever you go, there will be some nature of risk which will be happening. So the overall ability of controlling or maintaining of risk management is something which has to be done by us. So this is a part 1 module what we have done, that is something related to the definition, classification, and you have got a brief idea on what is the overall picture of risk and management. So in our further class we shall learn about what is the overall factors of risk management and what is the interface between the risk and insurance and the other factors. Thank you. Happy learning.